Before you go, I wanted to ask you some questions about the PACT Act, or the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxic Bill, which funds research and benefits for veterans who were exposed to toxic substances while they served. So you were one of the 11 senators to vote against this, and you were consistent. You voted against it both times, unlike many of your Republican colleagues who voted for it for the first time and then against it the second time. You voted against it because you said that two things. One is that you wanted to pay for the PACT expansion with an amendment of foreign aid moratorium, except Israel. Wanted to know why you exempted Israel, and also wanted to know if you thought we had any responsibilities to civilians in the area who were exposed to the same toxins that the soldiers were exposed to. And then the last question I had about this is that you mentioned that one of the reasons you opposed funding was because a lot of these diseases like hypertension and asthma exist among non-veterans. But what do you say to the research showing that there are higher rates among veterans?
So I've been a big believer throughout time that if we send our young men and women to war, we have a responsibility to take care of them. I voted previously for healthcare for people who have diseases associated with burn pits. The military, though, has always had sort of rules on what they take care of. So if you lose your leg in war, they take care of you for the rest of your life for that. If you lose your leg in war and then when you're 65 years old, you develop hypertension, the VA doesn't. And you can argue the VA should take care of everything, but the VA, frankly, has said it has to be service connected or related to your service. And the reason we do this is not because people say, oh, I don't want to help veterans. The reason we do this is there's a finite amount of resources. So, for example, my father-in-law served for 20 years. He gets all of his stuff paid for. That's a reward we give to people who will give us a whole career. People that serve 10 years don't get that. So we've always sort of differentiated on what type of care we give, how much payment for drugs we give. If you serve 2 years, you get very little of that, and you only get what paid for what diseases occurred during the time you were in the military. So it's one thing to say, yes, we should take care of people who have an injury related to something that happened in the military, but it's important to have some kind of link of causation. Now, saying there's a higher incidence of something, higher incidence of hypertension in people who had burn pit exposure, perhaps, but there also could be a higher incidence of other type of behaviors involved as well. And the thing is there are probably stronger arguments for respiratory ailments, but it's confounding. It's not always easy to make these judgments. If you smoked for 40 years and you have emphysema, and you also were exposed to a burn pit, it's very hard to make the judgment about causation of what actually causes this. But we do a lot for our veterans, and I've voted for a lot of expenditures for our veterans. But typically, if something comes up that's extraordinarily expensive like this is going to be over $300 billion in the face of already borrowing $1 trillion a year. I think it only makes sense that we should pay for it. We give about $30 billion a year in foreign aid. I see no reason why, if we can't afford and we run a deficit here, that we shouldn't say, well, you know what, for the next 10 years, we can't send welfare overseas because we're going to pay for our veterans here. So I've been a stickler for this on everything, whether it's 9/11 or otherwise. And somebody has to be fiscally conservative. It's very easy to be generous with other people's money. You have advocates running around saying, we want to give everybody everything all the time. Well, if that bankrupts the country or destroys the currency, or you wind up like Sri Lanka with 75% inflation, or you wind up with Venezuela with 50% inflation every month, would it have been worthwhile? So there's a lot of people with big hearts. There's a lot of people that want to help everyone, but we have a finite amount of resources. And if you extend all the benefits to everyone, then you may not have enough for those who you've already promised to. So the people who served a 20-year career in the military, you've made a promise to them. If you say, well, we're going to give the same benefits to those who served 2 years as 20 years, then you'd be taking away from the promise you made to the 20-year veterans. So there's a lot of reasons why we need fiscally conservative voices. It isn't easy to be fiscally conservative because obviously the emotions are to do everything for everyone. But I do think that we should help our veterans who have served in the military, but it doesn't mean that we throw out all rules and have just basically, unlimited sort of resources, because we don't.